Over the last year and a half, I'm constantly getting asked, how did I lose so much weight? How was I able to go from an everyday degenerate to an everyday bodybuilder? How was I able to stop drinking so much? What was my diet like? How was I working out? Everybody always asks the hows and the whats for the transformation, but nobody ever asks why. 3 years ago, during the pandemic shutdown, me and my roommate at the time, Brian, were putting together a puzzle, smoking some weed, and listening to some classic rock. Honestly, one of my favorite things to do in general. Upon completing this puzzle and upon putting the puzzle away, I stumbled upon an old box that my mom had given me a few months prior from when she was emptying out her storage. Upon opening this box, on the top of it were a bunch of old pictures from the past. Pictures of me and my friends, pictures of me and my cousins and my grandmother. And on the bottom of the box was also something from the past, but little did I know it was about to change my entire future. In the bottom of the box was a 3-ring binder, and on the 3-ring binder was handwritten Alan Choi. You see, I went into foster care at the age of 5, and Choi was my name before I got adopted at the age of 10. As soon as I opened up this binder, I realized it was actually all of the old paperwork from my social worker. And the beginning of the binder was everything detailing my family tree. Everything from my cousins, my aunts, my uncles, sisters, brothers. Up until this point, I had no idea about anything in my family. As a matter of fact, until that moment, I actually felt like I was by myself. I felt like I was an alien that got transplanted on here. And it was the first time in my life that I saw a lineage and I felt like I belonged. Don't get me wrong, my adopted family is the most amazing, loving family ever, and they did more than they ever could have imagined to make me feel welcome. But I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that I was curious about if there were any bloodline relatives and if I had any other relatives that looked like me. And that moment made me feel like I finally had a place on this earth. Now, the second part of the binder, I wasn't ready for. The second part of the binder were all of the counseling and therapy notes from when I was seeing a psych from when I went into foster care. And those notes were very challenging to read. It detailed how much pain I was in from the fact that my dad left me. How much I was questioning my worth because my mom had left me. I was hurt. I was scared. And I just felt like I didn't belong. These notes detailed months and years of me battling this feeling of not being enough, this feeling of being insignificant. And what was crazy to me then was because all of the moments in my life that triggered me, all of the moments I was still holding on to, moments such as being treated like shit in the Navy, moments such as being dumped by whatever girlfriend at the time, moments of facing Asian discrimination, moments of being told that I don't have real parents because I was adopted. All of those moments triggered the same feeling, which was not being enough, which was being made to feel insignificant. And it was crazy to me at that moment because I finally realized where all of that was coming from. What was even crazier was to actually find out about my dad. See, I've always been intrigued by the nature versus nurture conversation as it pertains to people's behaviors as they react and respond to circumstance. And although I haven't been raised by my dad since the age of 5, the parallels with how our lives turned out was frightening. He had joined the U.S. Army. I joined the U.S. Navy. He was a degenerate gambler. I once played poker for a living. He had married a bunch of times. I led a bachelor San Diego and Vegas life for the longest. He was an alcoholic. Well, I did say I was a sailor. And then I found out through my newly found cousin and uncle that our grandfather was the same exact way. Huge womanizer, alcoholic, anger problems, multiple wives. They say the 2 most important days in a man's life is the day that he's born and the day that he finds out why. And here I was, being shown the story of my grandfather, the story of my father, and how their lives turned out. And I had a decision to make, because I was being shown what would happen if I don't make changes in my life. Do I stay in my ways? Do I continue my behaviors? Do I remain a victim to the stories that I've been continuously telling myself? Or do I take control of my life and start taking control of my narrative? Do I start becoming the hero and role model that 5-year-old me needed to show him that he's worthy, show him that he's enough, and give him something to look up to instead of the stories that kept me into where I was? It was at this moment that I decided to own my shit and make a change. The biggest change that I thought I needed to make were my drinking habits and my fast food binge eating habits. With this, I decided to hire a coach and then sign up for a marathon and physique bodybuilding competition. In my mind, by signing up for these events, I was gonna ultimately hold myself 100% accountable for a sustained period of time. With the coach, they gave me a diet and workout plan, and I'll admit it was very challenging at first to transform from a very vague approach to my routine to a very specific diet and a workout plan intended to get me ready for stage. But I found out the more that I followed the plan and created the habits to stick with it, that my results got better. I started losing a bunch of fat, started gaining a bunch of muscle. I started having more energy, started becoming more confident, more self-aware. There were even events and moments where I felt myself getting triggered, but because I was more aware of where I was in my emotions, I started not reacting emotionally, but instead processed it, looked at the situation objectively, and more often than not removed myself because I realized that moment was only there to upset me. Although I was in this routine of making all of these changes, I still faced two problems. The first of which was drinking. I've always said you could take the degenerate man out of the degenerate scene, but you can't always take the degeneracy out of the degenerate man. I completely tailored off from drinking, but quickly into this routine, I found myself having this urge to drink and I'd give in. Because I had such a negative relationship with alcohol, every time that I broke the seal, I would continue to just drink, which then lead to the worst hangovers and moments of reflection the very next day. It wasn't until I changed my relationship with drinking that I was actually able to control it. Instead of pushing it all away and making myself feel bad about it, I just accepted that that's something I enjoy. Like, I enjoy whiskey. And so anytime that I felt the urge to drink, I allowed myself, except I gave myself the cutoff of being 2 drinks. By giving myself a limit and by allowing myself to not push away this urge, I actually found myself starting to drink less and then not drinking at all, especially when it came down to a cut. The second problem I kept running into was my motivation. Now, if you've ever tried to start a new diet or try to change your entire lifestyle, you would know why diets have a stereotypical 95% failure rate. But as they say, you have to make your goals bigger than your excuses. And every single time I kept on wanting to press snooze on that alarm, every single time I wanted to skip a workout, which honestly was about 40 to 45% of the time, I kept reminding myself of why I started. I kept reminding myself of the 5-year-old version of me that needed a role model to push through that adversity, to get over those limiting beliefs and actually feel like we're enough again. And when those moments were not enough, I actually triggered myself into working out. I would remind myself of the instances that I haven't let go and those instances that made me feel like I wasn't enough, such as the Navy, ex-girlfriends, being Asian, or being adopted. I would use these instances and use it as a pre-workout, because I'll tell you, no pre-workout in the world is as strong as being triggered. But having workouts that are inspired by triggers actually gave me an opportunity to work through these circumstances. It forced me to reapproach these circumstances, reapproach these instances, and view them from a completely different perspective. Because ultimately, I didn't want these moments to have control over me or my emotions anymore. And it was crazy. I kept sticking to a plan, finding a better way to handle my drinking urges, and then finding a better way to use my triggers as a way to bettering myself. this momentum, this cycle, this lifestyle carried me all the way into the marathon. And I'll be honest with you, the marathon was, although challenging, was easy, because the pressure of just finishing, when you can finish a marathon in however long you want to, is not that much of a pressure. When you think about how much training I did up until that point for that marathon compared to someone who can complete it without any training whatsoever, it kind of takes away the significance of that moment. Now, what was really challenging and what I was really stressing out about was the bodybuilding competition, because there is a completely different pressure that comes with just trying to finish than there is to being half naked and critiqued by judges in front of a crowd that you don't know. I remember like, oh my God, I'm gonna get judged. Oh my God, all these people are gonna see me half naked. Like, regardless of what the results are, I still had my own issues with my body. I reminded myself that the goal was never to actually win the competition, but just actually have the courage to train for it and get there and prove to myself that I was enough. And by the time I stepped up on stage, all the nerves that I had leading up into it were gone, because I found out that the entire time I was training just to be good enough on stage was actually training to see if I was good enough for myself, that I was good enough to hold myself accountable to a goal, that I was good enough to actually go after what I wanted in life and achieve it. I was on such a nostalgic high. I was on such a dopamine high, such a high everything, because I actually proved to myself what could happen if I actually made myself a priority and invested into that priority over and over again. And by that time I was on stage, I was the absolute best version of myself, no matter what. It was amazing to literally go from being insecure, not thinking of myself highly, not loving myself, not making myself a priority, to all of a sudden a whole year of just investing into myself and being my main priority. And it showed me so much more about who I was and what I was meant to be, because all of this would have never happened had I found that binder. And none of this would have ever happened had I actually figured out who the hell I was and why I did what I did. But after I got off stage, couldn't help but to be even more curious. If I can create these kind of results with the mindset of just proving myself that I'm good enough to compete, what were the results gonna be like if I trained to win? Couldn't help that there was a big void there, thinking of what I can accomplish if I actually set myself to the highest standard. And well, that led me to sign up for another competition.